There's a strange kind of silence that follows the release of playoff odds, the sort of silence that invites arguments, hope, denial, and just a little bit of fear. And today, that silence belongs to the Toronto Blue Jays. Welcome back to the Blue Jays Report, where there is always something to say about this team, because Fangraphs have dropped their latest playoff projections, and once again, they've managed to make Jays fans feel simultaneously encouraged and deeply uncomfortable. These numbers aren't vibes or hot takes. They're cold, calculated simulations run thousands upon thousands of times, stripping emotion out of the sport and daring us to react anyway. According to Fangraphs, the Toronto Blue Jays sit at a 61.8% chance of making the playoffs, third in the American League. Not elite, not disappointing, just precariously balanced on that thin line between confidence and chaos, where every April loss feels heavier than it should. At first glance, some fans might scoff. 61.8% doesn't sound like dominance. Others might nod grimly and say that feels about right. And honestly, there's a strong case for both reactions. The American League East has quietly turned into a knife fight. The Yankees remain annoyingly competent, even when they don't look spectacular. Boston have retooled with real intent, piling up pitching like a team that knows exactly where it went wrong. Baltimore, after a miserable season, have reemerged with teeth, adding power and daring the league to overlook them again. This is why the projection lands where it does. Toronto didn't suddenly get worse, the division simply refused to stay still. Every extra win Boston steals, every bounce-back month from Baltimore, every stubborn Yankees stretch eats into Toronto's margin for error. And that margin, according to Fangraphs, isn't huge. What makes these projections sting or soothe, depending on your mood, is their impartiality. Fangraphs doesn't care about narratives. It doesn't care about heartbreak or redemption arcs or unfinished business. It runs the simulations, accounts for injuries in some worlds and perfect health in others, and spits out the average. In roughly 6 out of 10 realities, the Blue Jays make it. In 4 out of 10, they don't. That's not disrespect. That's reality. Before we go any further, if you enjoy deep dives like this and want to follow this season with clear-eyed analysis, make sure you like the video, share it with a fellow Jays fan who's already stressing, and subscribe to the Blue Jays Report. This season is going to demand attention. One of the more fascinating elements in these projections is Baltimore. Fangraphs have them sneaking into the playoffs about 55% of the time, even ahead of teams like Houston. On paper, that feels bold. Their rotation is stitched together with uncertainty, relying heavily on arms with limited track records or injury concerns. Over a 162-game season, that kind of fragility tends to surface. Pitching, more than almost anything else, is what drags teams across the finish line, and Baltimore's staff feels like a gamble that could just as easily collapse as a good surprise. And then there's the elephant in the room wearing Dodger blue. A 99.1% chance to make the playoffs. Read that again. 99.1. At that point, it stops sounding like a projection and starts sounding like inevitability. The Dodgers aren't just deep, they're absurdly insulated against disaster. Lose a starter? There's another one. Lose 3? Fine, the bullpen absorbs it. The lineup shrugs and scores 6 anyway. Short of a meteor landing squarely on Los Angeles, it's genuinely hard to imagine a scenario where they're watching October from home. That contrast is what makes Toronto's 61.8% so compelling. Blue Jays fans don't get the luxury of tuning out the regular season. Every series matters. Every slump feels dangerous. Where Dodgers fans watch for MVP races and historical milestones, Jays fans watch for survival, momentum, and positioning. And in many ways, that's what makes it fun. Fangraphs don't just project playoff chances, though. They also estimate World Series odds, and this is where things get even more sobering. Toronto sit at around a 4.7% chance to win it all. That's not an insult, that's the cost of uncertainty. Teams like Boston are projected slightly higher despite similar playoff odds, largely because Fangraphs trust their rotation more in a short series. Pitching, more than almost anything else, is the currency of October, even in years where offense steals the spotlight. For the Blue Jays, this is the heart of the story. If the rotation clicks, if health cooperates, if the division games break just slightly in their favor, these odds become irrelevant. Baseball has never cared much for probability once the games are actually played. But if things wobble, if injuries stack, if the AL East turns ruthless, those simulations suddenly feel prophetic. And that's the payoff here. 61.8% isn't a verdict, it's an invitation. It says this team is good enough to matter, but not good enough to coast. It says this season is worth watching closely, arguing over passionately, and living with fully. So let us know what you think. Are these projections fair, too pessimistic, or dangerously optimistic? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Blue Jays Report. This season is going to demand attention.